Men of Reddit, what are the struggles of dating a very rich girl? Admitting financial struggles. When my wife and I were dating in university, her family invited me up to their cottage during the break between Christmas and New Year's to ski, skate and otherwise play in the snow. I wanted to go, but I didn't know how to ski and had no outdoor clothing appropriate to be out in the snow, no ski jacket, pants, or boots. I declined the invitation, but my then girlfriend was really sad and asked why. I had to admit I didn't have the gear needed, and I couldn't afford them. She then passed it on to her family, and when I visited them on Christmas Day, they led me to a room with 3 types of everything new with tags, laid out on a bed for me to choose from. It was a wonderful gesture, but I had mixed feelings. I appreciated the gear very much, but I felt like a charity case. Also, managing expectations of my wife for travel and expectations with children's activities. She was used to jetting away whenever they felt like it and had her own horses growing up. That's just not an option for us. We do okay and we are happy, but horses are not financially viable. I guess I had a different type than everyone else. We worked together, and you wouldn't know she was rich unless you really got to know her. She worked as a diversion, something to do, and meet new people. She never looked at the price of anything, had a $5,000 watch, Dolce & Gabbana glasses she would break at least once a month cause she's clumsy. Very humble, very sweet and probably the hardest worker there. We were managers. The issue was that there was absolutely nothing we could do together that was new to her. She had more money and free time. Her bucket list was completed by 22. There was nothing new or fresh within my, I don't know the word, realm, ability. We got along great, and I found out from a mutual friend she was excited to be with someone not using her or groveling cause she was *duck levels of rich. It was my pride I think that ruined it, nothing she did. I had issues letting her pay for everything, and I was unable to show her anything she hadn't seen. I stopped being fun because I couldn't wow or impress her, and it got in my head. She was perfectly happy doing normal things, but it wasn't enough for me. I had to impress her. We lost contact years ago. I hope she's doing well. She was fucking awesome and deserves to be happy. If you're coming from a very poor family, as was my case, expect a lot of butting of heads when it comes to financial issues. I was raised very poor. Now I make a decent amount of money, but if I'm ever in a situation where I have a lot of expenses and may run into financial issues, I tend to panic a little bit and plan my spending extremely carefully. My wife came from a wealthy family and she never had to deal with financial struggles at any point in her life, and she doesn't quite care about spending a lot of money. Basically, she doesn't think past the fact that we can afford something. She doesn't think about possibly needing money in the future, and that's where we always butt heads. In short, make sure you ask her to let you know before she spends more than X amount. That was the solution we came up with, and it has actually saved us from a lot of financial trouble. Spending should be a thing you both agree on, otherwise it's not going to work out. I dated a senator's daughter in high school. Everything was about keeping up appearances, and we had to be careful where we went in public and stuff like that. Her parents offered to get me nicer clothes to wear when we went to dinner in public, but I felt weird about it. Relationship didn't last long. I'm not good at being political. My roommate was very wealthy and her boyfriend ended up living with us for 2 years, and I remember they would have the same fights all the time. He came from a very poor household, tough family life, in a not so great area of the city, didn't graduate high school, etc. He was supporting himself working as a bartender. Compared to his childhood financial situation, he viewed supporting himself with a steady job as being successful, whereas she was always wanting him to do more, be bigger, etc. They also fought a lot over birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, etc. She would buy him really expensive gifts that he needed, but couldn't afford to buy himself. He needed new winter boots and a coat, so she would buy him really nice ones for Christmas. A good coat and boots with 1 or 2 other items can easily get close to $5-600. He could never get her a gift of such magnitude. She was somewhat understanding that he couldn't pay for something like that, but he used to tell me he always felt a lot of pressure to match her really expensive gifts with really creative ones. He said he would dread holidays, Valentine's Day and birthdays, because he would get so stressed out trying to constantly think of creative ways to match her really expensive gifts. It seemed to me like he was getting really bitter about having so much stress over creating a gift versus her being able to spend 5 minutes using her parents' money to get him something. I think it was also tough because she wanted to do so much stuff and had the financial security to do it. She wanted to travel a lot and he just couldn't afford it. She would pay for him sometimes, but that bothered him. I met up with them once when I was living in Thailand and she kept using phrases like "this is so cheap for," like she would insist we got to the most expensive restaurants in the area because a comparative restaurant in the States would be way more expensive. She also had a massive inheritance. She doesn't have access to it till she's 35, but he used to tell me he was so bitter that he would probably have to work his whole life until he was dead and would probably never make enough to really retire, whereas she could basically stop working at 35 if she wanted. They dated for 4 years, but it eventually fell apart. She was always doing something. Constantly going on trips, or to the openings of expensive restaurants, or traveling to her parents' vacation house, or getting tickets for some opening night or something. It was frankly exhausting. She had money and she wanted to spend it, and I just couldn't keep up. I say had, because it was entirely her parents' money. She was in grad school, though she was struggling at it, and otherwise had absolutely no work or experience. Outside of a restaurant, she barely had any life experience either. I dated a pretty rich girl. Her dad was a prominent lawyer, her mom a successful artist, and her uncle was a 1980s pop star. Honestly, they were great people to be around. They were old money, and not snotty or overly pretentious. Yes, they had a big-ass old house and drove quality, not overly flashy, cars. Yes, they had whatever they wanted, but not at all in a look-at-me type way. I on the other hand was dirt poor. I mean, in the early 90s grunge was a blessing for me, because I looked like that already. But her parents didn't care, and we're always very welcoming. Her mom even took me to my first punk show. I guess it's true when they say cash screams and wealth whispers. I can't say very rich, but my wife and I definitely come from different socioeconomic castes. Her family was upper middle class, and mine was just above poverty level. She just didn't understand the panic I felt when money was running low. She didn't know the dread you get when your car starts making a strange noise and you know you can't afford to fix it. For her, everything would work out because she had parents with money to swoop in and make it all better. In short, she never understood the struggle and wasn't very smart with her money. It's not even that she wasn't smart, it's that she wasn't the same sort of ingenious that poor people are with stretching every penny. Eventually, we both got decent jobs and managed to put back a good savings, and we both grew to understand each other's money habits. I dated a girl from a wealthy family when I was in college, and I was very poor. The most frustrating thing for me was that our definition of a crisis was so different. From month to month I would literally not know whether I could afford my rent or be able to put gas in my car, and she would be freaking out about some, to me, minor social issue, or whether a store carried a fashion brand she liked. It definitely made things difficult, and I had to remember that it's your perspective that dictates what is a crisis and what isn't. It was honestly a lesson I've tried to remember over the years. I dated a girl in college that came from a very wealthy family, Texas oil money. Like, she flew from Dallas to Florida, where we went to school, in her dad's business jet. That kinda rich. I think the biggest thing for me was how out of touch she was with everyday money issues. For example, someone smashed into my car in the parking lot, and I was totally upset about it. She was like, "It's okay, you can just get a new one." She had no concept of how insurance or deductibles work, and she didn't understand that I could not simply go out and get it fixed right away. Another example was that she wanted me to go to Miami to see a U2 concert with her. She had like front row tickets. I couldn't go because I had to work. She didn't understand that my boss would not give a poop about how cool it would be to see U2. This was before they became bad. My girlfriend, now wife, wasn't rich herself, but had very rich parents, both lawyers, one in family law, the other in corporate counsel, but they were pretty normal during her upbringing. The law careers and massive salaries came when she was a teenager. The toughest thing was that her parents would offer to pay for nearly anything, but later try to use that as leverage to control her when they didn't like what she was doing. She was college aged, so it happens a bit. Parents and teenagers aren't perfect. Things like stop paying for her car suddenly or reneging on a trip that they offered to pay for and she booked and was suddenly on the hook for the cost. It was certainly toxic from their end, and she kept falling for it each time. However, in her 20s, once she was out of college and employed, she didn't need their money, so anything that was offered with strings attached or had the potential to do that, she could just decline. They learned pretty quickly that manipulation via finances isn't a good way to foster a relationship with your daughter in her 20s. Her mom figured it out, her dad not so much. For unrelated reasons they got divorced, and her relationship is still very strained with her dad. This is probably gonna get buried, but I've always wanted to write it out. I was never sure how rich she was. I just knew her family had property in a couple places in the US and China. And this is also how I found out property in China is dumb expensive. When she went for the holidays, if she wanted to say, stay in Shanghai and then go to Beijing later, she didn't have to look at hotels or Airbnb, she just had to make sure she grabbed the right set of keys. It was weird. She wasn't dripping with designer clothes and drove a fuel efficient compact, but just looking at where her family had apartments/houses, I can only imagine. She was a super sweet, down to earth girl. Biggest heart in the world, very hardworking, and acted like a child in a candy shop everywhere she went. I think the biggest strain came when we would eat together. For me, money was tight and the best way to stretch my college scholarship money was to cook meals in bulk. Before she met me, she ate out literally every single meal. At first, it took some adjusting and rebudgeting. Bless her heart, she understood and found compromises. She loved my cooking and would surprise me with groceries and then say I have to pay her back by cooking whatever she wanted. Every once a while she'd pick up the entirety of a bill that we were supposed to split, but she always found a way to make sure I didn't feel down about it. I don't think she ever once bought me an expensive gift. Most things were either handmade or were very thoughtful, for example shoes I'd been eyeing for months but couldn't afford, and she noticed them my computer browser. I miss that girl. I hope she's doing well.